Good afternoon and welcome, sports fans. It is April 19th, 2022, and for those of you who are counting, it's episode 7 of StraussNet Sports Radio. It is getting into my favorite time of the year. All things considered, I like postseason baseball in October, but I think when we get into May, June, and July, it's even better for me. Right now, it's April, so the weather's not as good as it could be, but it's warming up, so baseball's going on. It's a see how things take shape. We're all excited about our teams. We're in that part of the year where we're happy that baseball's back. We're not quite scoreboard watching yet. But then the Stanley Cup Playoffs are about to start in hockey. That's right around the corner. And for those of you who are basketball fans, the NBA playoffs have begun. And we're going to touch on all three of those today. Let's start with the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Now, normally it's starting right about now, the middle April period of time, but we're a little bit backed up for multiple reasons. Go back a couple years, we had the late playoffs in the bubble in 2020, which pushed back last year's season to being kind of a half season. And then into this year, I don't think we got off to a late start per se, but we were supposed to have an Olympic break, which turned into a quote-unquote COVID rescheduling break when teams had some games postponed. So they didn't go to the Olympics, but they moved some games around. So we had pretty much the month of February off, and the playoffs are about 2 weeks late starting, which is fine. It's not the end of the world. They'll start on time next year. So we haven't really quite had the regular hockey schedule for a couple of years now. Not since the 2019 Stanley Cup that the Blues won, followed by the next two Tampa Bay Lightning Stanley Cup championships, which were one in the bubble and then two with limited or no fans, depending on where they were at, and the goofy schedule last year. For those of you who don't remember last year, because of travel restrictions, they did have all of Canada play in one division and then split the rest up into regional. So we didn't really have the traditional East-West. It was the first time an Eastern Conference team won the quote-unquote Western Conference Campbell Trophy. This year, everything's back to normal. We have all the regular divisions, all the regular playoffs set up, fans in the stands. I think even Canada's pretty much back to full capacity. Maybe not quite, but we will have some Canadian teams in, so it'll matter. The players who are unvaccinated can't cross over quite yet. We'll see what changes with that. But let's take a look at the standings and whatnot. The St. Louis Blues are in. They clinched over the weekend. They played Minnesota and Nashville, and in the big game against Minnesota, they were up 4-1. Minnesota came back, tied it at 5-5, and the Blues ended up winning on a Braden Shen goal in overtime to clinch the playoffs. That puts them currently in second place in their division. Now, for those of you who don't follow the NHL playoffs, I kind of like their playoff format. I didn't at first, but now I do. You have to play your way out of the division. The top 3 teams in each of the 4 divisions, 2 in each conference, make the playoffs. Then 2 wild cards per conference, which can cross over. So generally, you're playing 2 divisional rounds with a possible wild card from the other division. And then you play the other team from the other series in your divisional bracket, and then you cross over for the conference finals and then the Stanley Cup final. So right now in the Central Division, where the Blues are located, you have Colorado, who just clinched the division, and they will possibly be the President's Trophy winner. Hockey standings work in a points system, 2 for a win, 1 for an overtime loss, no points for a regulation loss. And then your tiebreaker is regulation and overtime wins. So trying to discount the shootout here. The Blues have 102 points, good for second place. Right behind them is Minnesota with 101. So the Blues and Minnesota are very, 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 very likely to play each other in the first round. St. Louis would have to fall all the way down to a wild card spot for that to change. Right now, the only question is, will the Blues be at home for games 1 and possible 7, or will Minnesota? Blues have played one more game than Minnesota. So right now it looks like Colorado, St. Louis, Minnesota, and a wild card. The Pacific is led by Calgary, who has clinched a spot, then Edmonton, and currently the Los Angeles Kings. The 2 wild cards are currently Nashville and Dallas at 91 points. Those are both Central Division teams. Vegas, Vancouver, and Winnipeg are not necessarily eliminated, but it really looks like Nashville and Dallas have a leg up. Probably Vegas has I guess Vegas and Vancouver have a chance. It's going to be tough for Winnipeg, but you never know. So that's kind of the West. So right now, if the Western playoffs started today, Colorado would be playing. Dallas and Nashville both have 91. Right now it's listed as Dallas because of that regulation overtime wins tiebreaker. And then St. Louis would host Minnesota. Calgary would play the other wild card, that'd be Nashville, and then Edmonton would play Los Angeles. Edmonton and Calgary getting in there representing Canada. We had a few years where there were no Canadian teams. The questions of, can they get McDavid and Draisaitl deep in the Stanley Cup playoffs? They score a lot. Can they defend? Can they play well in goal? We'll see. I'm not going to get too deep into predictions just because we do have almost exactly 2 weeks left. The Blues, in fact, have 6 games left. Some of these other teams, maybe a few more, a few fewer. But that's the Pacific. In the Central, like I said, Colorado would play a while. I feel like the Blues are playing well at the right time. They went through a stretch where it seemed like they weren't playing all that well, but in fact, they're playing really, really well right now. They've won all sorts of games in a row. Let's pull that up, actually. Go to the Blues schedule. They're playing the Boston Bruins tonight in a rematch of the 2019 Stanley Cup Finals. And in fact, they are on a winning streak of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 in a row, trying to go for 10 tonight against Boston. They won 4-2 in Boston a week ago, and they are hosting Boston tonight, giving away replica Stanley Cup championship rings. Probably a giveaway we were looking forward to over the last 2 years, but without fans or the season being stopped a couple years ago, something that didn't get taken care of. So the Blues have been pretty exciting. The fun thing about the Blues to watch has been the goaltending. Although Jordan Binnington hasn't had quite the year he's hoped, Ville Husso has in fact stepped up. Husso's stats look like this. He has a record of 24, 6, and 5 overtime losses, 2 shutouts this year. I was at one of those. That was the opening week, the second game of the year at home against the Los Angeles Kings. He has a 244 goals against and a 923 save percentage. Jordan Binnington has not quite had the year he was hoping for. He is at 16, 13, and 4 with a 314 goals against average and a 903 save percentage. 2 shutouts. Ironically, 314 is St. Louis's area code, so that's kind of funny. His goals against average has gone up every year since the Stanley Cup run, but you never thought he was going to be as good as he was there. I'm not that worried about him. Aside from the elite of the elite goalies, it feels like guys kind of go up and down as they get played a lot and a little, and I'm going to write off some of the last year because of all the different protocols I've had to deal with. So I'm not that worried about him, honestly. I know there's a lot of talk with Ville Husso being an unrestricted free agent and how well he's playing. If I had to guess, from watching Doug Armstrong, we're going to get one of two things. One, my personal prediction, Ville Husso is going to get some big contract for having one really, really good year, and I'm not discounting that this could be what he is for real, but he has only had the one really, really good year. And I think someone's going to bite on that and take the risk. Someone like an Edmonton who's still trying to put it all together. Someone like a Montreal who was in the Cup final last year, but they didn't quite have what they needed in net this year, with Carey Price being seemingly constantly hurt. And Jake Allen's a good goalie, but he's not the guy you're going to ride all the way to the playoffs at this point. He's a veteran. He's fallen to the backup role. I think there's a team out there that would like to sign Ville Husso and will take the gamble. It kind of reminds me of when the Blues got Ryan Miller, where it felt like this guy's here for the ride, and then he's going to sail off to another team for a lot of money, and the Blues aren't going to pay him because they had Brian Elliott, and they re-signed him for a reasonable contract. Jordan Binnington is on a contract for the next several years, and it's fairly reasonable. It's a big contract, but it's there. They have him. It's going to take a lot for the Blues to move him, which brings me to scenario 2. I don't think the Blues can move Jordan Binnington at this point for the money that he's owed and the fact that he didn't have a great year. They're going to have to give something up to get rid of him or take on another bad contract. So I don't think Doug Armstrong's too interested in doing something like that. He's very smart when it comes to the cap. That's why I said I thought It's more likely that he's going to hang on to Binnington and let Husso see what's out there. And if Husso takes a big contract, he takes a big contract. And the Blues say, okay, we still have our Stanley Cup winning goalie who we think can rebound. We just have to get a guy to go with him. So like I said, scenario 2. Ville Husso, will you take a 1 or 2 year bridge contract? A prove-it contract is what they call it. A friend of mine at work who's a big Blues fan was talking to me about this today. He thinks this is kind of the route that they might attempt to go. See if Husso will come back and prove it on maybe a high dollar deal but low term, so only a couple of years, maybe a 1 year, show that it's for real. He plays alongside Binnington. Blues find out whether Binnington's going to rebound or if Husso's for real and kind of make a decision next year. I think someone's going to take the plunge on Ville Husso. I don't think it's going to be the Blues. I don't think the Blues are going to have a way to move Binnington the way they would like to get Ville Husso signed to a long-term deal. That's my opinion. I think Jordan Binnington is here. And honestly, I like Jordan Binnington. Calling me a homer, a favorite player type guy, I like Jordan Binnington. He did win the Cup. Yes, you've got to figure out the future. You have to win another one. And maybe Binnington's the guy, maybe he's not. Maybe Husso's the guy, maybe he's not. I just don't see Jordan Binnington's contract getting moved for nothing. I don't see them taking the hit. I don't see them doing the compliance buyout. I see them keeping a Ville Husso if they can, but not forcing the issue. They've got 2 good goalies. I don't think Binnington's as bad as he's played this year. So that's my opinion. Having said that, Ville Husso is going to be the guy heading into the playoffs. Let's just be honest there. He's been the best goalie. He's the starter. I think everybody on this team understands this team can win a Stanley Cup. They looked like it early. They did not in the middle third of the year. And now late, they are playing better than they've played almost in a couple of years. This looks like they were playing when they won the Stanley Cup a couple years ago. And they were playing really, really well the year after. And then the season got shut down. And we went to the bubble a few months later. And it just looked like the team never got it back. It's hard. Some teams picked it up, some teams didn't in the bubble. So I wrote those playoffs off. I wish they would have won, but when they lost, it was like, okay, I was more happy to have something to enjoy than being critical of a team having to go through the day in, day out of that whole situation months after you've been playing without any real ramp-up time, and then just being thrust into your pre-playoff rounds for seeding and then the playoffs themselves. So I wasn't too worried about that. Last year I'm taking with a grain of salt as opposed to writing off, where they played pretty well off and on. They had some defensive issues. There were no fans in the stands. They had to go through all these protocols. They get to the playoffs. There are fans back in the stands. It's not full capacity. There's still a lot of rules. And then they have to play Colorado, and they just get banged up in the first couple of games. Colorado, Nazem Kadri making dirty hits, and it was doomed to start. I thought last year's team was better on paper than they were in play. So it was disappointing, but obviously they made some moves. The team this year looks really good. We've seen the evolutions of Robert Thomas, Jordan Kyrou. Ryan O'Reilly's kind of taking a back seat. He's not having as good a year statistically, but I think he still does all the little things right. There have been people talking about how well Tage Thompson, who is the prospect piece in the O'Reilly trade, has had a great year. I wouldn't be critical of that trade because they won the Stanley Cup. Ryan O'Reilly was the Conn Smythe, and now here they are a couple years later, people talking about them being a cup contender. And honestly, if you look around the league, the Western Conference, I don't see that many teams that scare me as someone to challenge St. Louis. Honestly, Colorado is the biggest threat. I think the Blues can beat everyone else. Calgary's dangerous, but if you're playing Calgary, you're in the conference final. Calgary and Edmonton score a lot of goals. What are they defensively? We'll see. But Colorado's the biggest, baddest team possibly in the whole playoffs. Currently, to give you a little bit of a rundown on the East, Carolina and Florida lead their divisions, and Florida is likely to win that division, the Panthers. They've done a really good job there. Toronto and Tampa are the 2-3 seeds currently in that division, and it's a 6-point difference, so it's kind of likely it'll stay that way. New York Rangers and the Penguins are the 2-3 in the Metropolitan with Carolina. New York can pass Carolina. That's only a 2-point difference. The wild cards currently are Boston and Washington, clocking in at 97 and 96 points. And those teams have all locked. The New York Islanders are the first out right now, but everybody's clinched over in the Eastern Conference. It's just a matter of seeding, seeing where teams are going to line up. And to look at those divisions, Boston is in Tampa's division. They're 3 points behind. The Capitals are 1 point behind Pittsburgh in their division. So talking about being a quote-unquote divisional team rather than a wild card team. Really, everyone past the division winners is a wild card, but just for the sake of you're either playing in your own division or you're not. And I've heard teams talk about sometimes it's almost be easier to go over the other division. If you look at the West, Colorado's the worst threat in the West. If you're a wild card, you almost want to play Calgary first rather than Colorado. But teams don't play to lose. I still don't believe that. I've heard people talk about it. I know it happens in football, but I don't really believe it in the NHL. So that's where we're at. We're set up for the playoffs. I'm looking forward to attempting to get tickets to the playoffs on Thursday. Blues home game 1. Hopefully that'll be game 1, home ice advantage. And then hope for a little bit of help from someone like Dallas or Nashville to maybe knock off Colorado. It's going to be tough. It's going to be really tough. If I had to guess who's coming out of the West, I really would say Colorado's going to the Stanley Cup final. But you have to play the games. That's why we play them. You have to play the games. So that's your hockey rundown. Like I said, 2 weeks left, and then the playoffs start. Like I said, I like this format. It's an interesting format. We play out of your division. You know, we have baseball now doing the extra wild cards, and they're just kind of bracketing up. Baseball is almost behind on how it works. It was, 1, 2, 3, 4, hosted 5, 6, 7, 8 in hockey. NBA did something different this year, and I don't know how I feel about it or not. In the NBA, they did the play-in. You went all the way down to the 10th seed to get 8 seeds. Follow me on this. The 7, 8, 9, 10 in each conference all are going to end up playing each other. The 7 and 8 play one game in a play-in tournament, and the winner of that game is the 7 seed. And the loser plays the winner of the 9-10 game. The loser of the 9-10 game is eliminated. The winner of that third game is the 8th seed. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's convoluted. My wife, who's a casual sports fan, I told her about this, and even she understood how kind of dumb it sounded. Now, my buddy at work, he just moved to Baltimore. He's a big Golden State fan. He says he likes it because if you have a team with a big injury, it keeps them in it. You're not discounting them just because they had something happen. Now, my response is that's been the way things are since the beginning of time. You have bad luck. The St. Louis Cardinals last year made it as a wild card team. They were 5 games out of the division and pitched Johan Oviedo, and the kitchen sank for like the first half of the season because they lost Jack Flaherty. They had other guys hurt. Dakota Hudson was out. Miles Michaelis was out. You'd think you'd win 5 more games. Well, they didn't, so they had to play a wild card game. They lost to Max Scherzer and Chris Taylor and the Dodgers in one game. That's how the cookie crumbled. That's how the chips fell. Whatever analogy you like, zinger. That's how it went. I don't think the NBA needs these extra 2 seeds who didn't make the playoffs to get a playoff to get in the playoffs. It's kind of similar to what they did with the bubble, but the bubble was out of necessity. The play-in rounds for hockey and basketball in the 2020 summer was because they stopped the season. They had to give those teams a chance. You could have just said, all right, whoever was in 1 through 8 to end the season was who's playing. I don't think too many people would have complained, but they didn't finish the season, and that's kind of what gave them this idea. I don't think it's necessary. I feel like the teams who were supposed to get in got in anyway. I mean, if you look at the standings and the play-in round, the only thing that happened, the only monkey wrench in the whole thing, I mean, it all started last Tuesday. The 7-seed Nets beat the Cavaliers, who were the 8th seed. Nets got in as a 7 seed as the 7 seed. Timberwolves, same story over the Clippers. 7 seed beat the 8 seed, got in. Next night, 9-seed Hawks beat the 10-seed Hornets. 9-seed Pelicans beat the 10-seed Spurs. So far, all the high seeds have won. So the 8 seeds and the 9 seeds played each other in the last game of the play-in round. And the 9 seeds both won. So you had a 9 seed beat an 8 and a 9 and 8. That's it. That's all that happened. You flipped the first team out, beat the last team in. That's the only thing they did with this play-in round. It did nothing for me. Nothing. Let's look at the standings. Let's take a look. And the Atlanta was 1 win shy of the record of Cleveland. And New Orleans, they were actually a little further down. They won 36 games, and the Clippers won 42. So that was a little bit different. Now, I'm sure in the future there'll be a little bit more chaos, but let's be honest, they didn't do all that much. Now, on to the real playoffs. I know a lot of you out there are Bulls fans. They snuck in as a 6. I wouldn't say snuck in. They had a good most of their year. Some injuries derailed them being a home field, home court seed. Bear with me as I don't follow the NBA quite as closely. I know my co-workers at 101 ESPN Peoria do follow it a little bit better, and I've heard a lot about it, and we carry it on that station. We carry the Bulls, so I've heard some of what's going on this year. I, on the other hand, am a Celtics fan. They are up 1-0 on the Nets. They are a 2 seed versus the 7. The Celtics looked like a ho-hum. They kind of flipped places with the Bulls, it felt like. The Celtics felt like a low seed who was a good team but not a great team for most of the year, but with some great players. And then as the year went on, they got better. They started playing better, and I've always felt like the Celtics' strength is that they play as a team. The NBA, I refer to it as a diva league. The NBA D League is not the same NBA Diva League. It's about the stars, and I want to play here, and I don't like him, and I don't like playing with so-and-so, and I don't like this coach, and I want to go here now. Look at what LeBron does. Now, LeBron is one of the best athletes on the planet of all time. But anytime he wants to change, anytime he's not happy, whatever doesn't become the shiny new toy, he leaves cities. He's been to Cleveland twice, and now he's on the Lakers. And now the Lakers have a new coach. And he wants this player and that player. And I feel like there's so many people like that. We have Ben Simmons getting moved around the league, Kevin Durant moving around the league, James Harden gets to one place, doesn't like it, goes to another. It's just the NBA, the personalities for me, it's just not really for me. Now, I like the Celtics because it feels like, and they've had some personalities, but I like Jason Tatum. I think he's a good kid. He plays the game well. He doesn't seem to be on the super-duper star level of, these Harden and LeBron. Now, maybe I'm discounting him. I always discount my own players, it feels like. But Jason Tatum's a good player, and the Celtics always seem to play this team-oriented game. It always feels like it's an uphill battle for them, but if it were to pay off, it would be so sweet. A few years ago, 2018, when Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward were hurt, they were 1 win from going to the NBA Finals and lost to LeBron James. It was literally the team game versus the solo game. That was that Cavaliers team. They had some good players, but it was LeBron James taking things into his own hands and getting them there, and then they lost to Golden State, who does both. They have the stars and the team game to get it done. But I think that's why I like the Celtics. They're not an underdog per se, but they play the team game. Basketball is about more than just the one guy. That's why people like college so much better. The Celtics have a tough draw. The Celtics have the Nets with Durant and supposedly Ben Simmons coming back. And Harden left. That was the Ben Simmons trade. Harden's in Philadelphia. And Kyrie Irving returns to Boston. He's already managed to make a fool of himself with the middle finger towards the crowd. He says he liked his time in Boston, but then he does something like this. The crowd boos him because he came in, he left the Cavaliers with LeBron because he wanted to make a team for his own. He wanted to be the centerpiece. And he was for the first half of that season. Then he got hurt, and they kind of put together this group of, it was younger Jason Tatum. And then next year, after they'd realized what they did in the playoffs, it was like, okay, Kyrie, you're not the superstar. It's all of us. We have a good team. We don't need just the one. We have the many. And he didn't really like that. He wanted to be the guy. Jason Tatum was becoming the guy. And that Celtics team broke up to a degree. A lot of those guys are gone now. Tatum and Smart are there, but, Irving's gone. Horford's back. Morris is gone. There was a lot of locker room bad chemistry there that tore that down, and they've hung around for a couple of years and retooled, I like to say, instead of rebuild, because they didn't break it all down. They just got rid of some pieces, and some pieces left. And Irving's now, with Durant, they teamed up to try to make this super team, and so far it hasn't worked because no one's been able to stay healthy. I'm not going to count the Kyrie Irving vaccination thing as not staying healthy. He makes a personal choice there, and it's his choice. It's his life. As a result, the team suffered a little bit in the standings because they didn't have him for home games or games in New York. He wasn't allowed to play, or Toronto. But now he's back, and he's allowed to play pretty much everywhere but Toronto. Let's take a look there and see if they're in. They are. They're playing the 76ers. So it would be the conference finals probably, if anything, before they played them, because they bracketed up. But anyway, the Nets they're a dangerous 7 seed. They're not really a 7 seed. They're better than that. So it's a tough draw for the Celtics. Celtics did win Game 1 on a very fun last couple of seconds of regulation. A buzzer beater, not of the traditional heave-it-up sense, but pass into Jason Tatum where he spun around and laid it up with time winding off the clock, and that was the game. So they won Game 1. They are playing tomorrow at 6 p.m. in Game 2. We'll see if the Celtics can keep it rolling and maybe make their way to the conference finals or farther. Bulls are down 1-0 to Milwaukee, the defending champions. So they're the 3 seed. The Bulls are the 6. They play tomorrow at 8:30 Central. That's a tough matchup for them as well. So we'll keep an eye on all that. A lot of people think the Suns are kind of the team to beat in the entire NBA. They're the 1 seed from the West. Again, I'm not going to get too much into NBA because I'll be speaking completely out of my own depth. So I'm just being honest there. So we have the hockey playoffs coming up and the NBA playoffs already underway. So if you're a basketball fan, you're already enjoying the intensity of the playoffs. If you're a hockey fan, you're kind of just waiting. You know, I'm a Blues fan. I'm excited for tonight's game, and then the rest of the slate is going to be, please don't get hurt, please keep winning, and get home ice. It'd be fun that way. I like starting the playoffs at home. I've been to many a playoff game, and the first couple I went to were the first game of the whole playoffs. I think it was the first 4 years was like that. My first game was in 2013 against the Kings, and Alex Steen took a puck out from behind the net that Jonathan Quick had mishandled and wrapped it around on a penalty kill and scored the overtime goal. In 2014, I saw the Blues beat the Blackhawks in triple overtime. That was fun, but they ended up losing both of those series. 2015, I went to Game 1 against Minnesota. 2016, I went to Game 1, another overtime winner against the Blackhawks. So those first 4 years I went to the playoffs, I saw them win the first game of the entire playoffs 3 of those 4 times, and the 3 wins were all in overtime, one of them in triple overtime. I will never forget that. That is, up until a couple years ago, that was the greatest hockey game I'd ever been to. Having said that, a few years later, Blues win the Stanley Cup. Went to a few games. Mr. Bradshaw, who's not on this week's episode, but you've heard his voice here before, he and I went to a couple of games in Stanley Cup playoffs in 2019, went to the conference finals. The hand pass game is what it's been referred to. You always know a game's good when it has a name. The hand pass game. Blues were up with seconds to go. Logan Couture of the Sharks puts the puck in the net. This is Game 3 of the conference finals in 2019, and the series is tied 1-1. We're in St. Louis, and so the Blues had thrown the puck down for icing a few times just to clear the puck, which isn't a horrible strategy. It just didn't work, and the Sharks end up scoring to tie it. And then the puck goes down the ice in overtime, and Gustav Nyquist kind of hand passes the puck, or is it Carlson? Carlson hand passes the puck. Man, I can't remember now. Now I'm going to have to look this up. But one of the Sharks hand passes, he bats the puck down. I think it was Nyquist bats the puck down, and Carlson ends up scoring the goal. It goes in the net, and you can't move the puck with your hand. You can't forward progress the puck in the offensive zone with your hand. There's different things you can do in hockey depending on whether you're defending or moving backwards, but you can't forward progress the puck with your hand. It can't be a hand pass is what it's called. And you just batted it down, but it can't be, if you just bat the puck down to try to get it out of the air, great. But it was a distinct pass with his hand over the other side of the net. It was put in the net, and it's the end of the game. And it was missed. The referee missed it, and they didn't review it, and it's, for some reason, an unreviewable play. And this is one of the maddest I've ever been at a game. But I go back and I tell Tim now, as upset as we were, that might have been the single most important moment in those entire Stanley Cup playoffs. And yes, it was very far along. We'd already gone through being up 2-0 in the first round against Winnipeg and then losing the next two games and winning the final two games. Already dealt with a Game 7 double overtime winner against Dallas after being down 3-2 in the series and having to win those last two games. It's like everything that happened in that playoffs was crazy, but I still say the moment that changed the entire thing was the Sharks hand pass thing. And the Sharks had gotten away and gotten lucky in the first two rounds as well. So it was already kind of some bad blood with how the Sharks had gotten there. They were a good team, though. And then this hand pass thing happens, and the Blues could have been like, well, we got screwed. And they were mad on the ice. Craig Berube, it's documented in the locker room, said, we're not talking about it. I don't want you guys talking to the media about it. We didn't clear the puck. We didn't win in regulation. We didn't come back and win in overtime. I don't want to talk about this distraction. We're going to bear down and we're going to win the next game no matter what. And they came out and seconds into the game went up 2-0 in Game 4 and never lost another game. I believe it was Mother's Day. I was at the brunch for Game 5 in San Jose. I want to say it was Mother's Day. I don't quite... It couldn't have been Easter because it was late May. And they set up for the clincher that was going to be in St. Louis. There were 2 games to go, obviously, Game 6 and Game 7. The Blues were up 3-2 in this case. I went and got tickets to that. I was not missing that. And sure enough, they came out. It was like tornadoing outside before the game started. They told us we had to stay in our seats. I think people thought they were getting us pumped up. And it's like, no, there's really bad weather outside. Let's get this thing going, though. And the Blues came out and just dismantled a beaten-up Sharks team. They didn't have some of their key players. It really wasn't an even game on the roster sheet, but it was about time the Blues had some luck in that department after all the years of suffering. They won and went to the Stanley Cup final, and I finally got to watch them. I got to watch them host the they didn't really hoist the trophy because in hockey, for those of you who don't follow, teams think it's superstitious bad luck to touch the conference trophies before you win the Stanley Cup, because the first one you want to lift is the Stanley Cup. So a lot of teams they'll shake the hand of the commissioner, the deputy commissioner, and then skate off. But usually, lately, they all come and take a picture with it. They don't pick it up, but they'll all come and do a team picture. And there have been teams that have picked it up. I want to say the Lightning picked it up the last couple of years, and they won the last couple of years, so they don't care. I know the Penguins have done it, and they won. The Penguins started doing it because they lost to Detroit in 2008. They didn't touch it. And then the next year when they played the Detroit Red Wings again in 2009, they picked it up. And they said, well, we lost last year, so why not? So there's a lot of mystique about the whole touching the conference trophies. The Campbell Bowl for the West and the Prince of Wales Trophy for the East. And like I said, last year, the first ever Eastern team won the Western Trophy. I want to say the Lightning got no, it was the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens got the Campbell Trophy because it was kind of a joke. They're like, well, the Montreal Canadiens have all the other trophies. Why not have a banner for winning the Campbell Trophy for the first time an Eastern team wins the Campbell? They actually weren't going to award the conference trophies. They weren't even going to call it the conference finals just because there were no conferences. It was 4 distinct divisions. They were only going to play divisions until the playoffs, and then build it around that for travel's sake because of all the restrictions and stuff. And eventually they just decided, well, let's do it anyway. And I think it was because Montreal was playing a Western team, whereas the Lightning were playing another Eastern team. So there was one of the Final Four was a West. So they were able to. They were like, why not give one of these two teams the West, and we'll give the two Eastern teams a chance to win the East. But I digress. Anecdotally. So hand pass led to the Blues riding the storm into the Stanley Cup Final. They beat the Bruins in a very, very tough 7-game series, and that's the Blues' first ever Stanley Cup. And now, 2 years later, 3 years later, because we had 2020, 2021, it feels like last year was the only playoffs we had because the bubble was so different. A couple years later, it feels like the Blues are on track to potentially go all the way back. We'll see. They're going to have to go through Colorado. First things first, they're probably going to have to go through Minnesota, who I think they can beat, but you have to win the first 4. You have to win the first game before you can win the next 15. And that's kind of how the Blues took it. And Craig Berube is the perfect coach for the Blues to get them through that. So it'll be exciting. I'm excited to see the New York Rangers in the playoffs. They've been very good this year. I would really like to see Blues Rangers in the Stanley Cup Final. I would love to go to New York and see the Blues in the Stanley Cup Final. I probably won't. That's money that I don't think I have, but that would be really cool. The second half of the show, we'll be right back. We're going to talk some baseball, and I don't really do grind my gears. I don't get worked up. I don't do the things I don't like. I don't do that segment, but we're going to talk about some things that have me disappointed about baseball season so far, from jerseys to rule changes to roster changes to bad decision making. We're going to be right back with baseball talk here on StraussNet Sports Radio. Welcome back to StraussNet Sports Radio. I want to apologize. We did have some technical difficulties in the first half of the show. My program is telling me that there were a couple of dropouts. I don't really know why. It's not the microphone. I think, the computer's getting hung up and it thinks it's loading something, so it just kind of stops. So bear with me on that. I did try to cut around it so that at least there wasn't a big gap where it was missing. One of them I just cut and redid part of it, and you won't know the difference. But there's a couple of spots in that first half where it feels like I was talking and then it just stops and I'm talking about something else. So bear with me on that. Let's get into some baseball. Cardinals and Red Sox. Baseball, my year revolves around baseball. New Year's is opening day, not New Year's Eve. I always June, that's when this is going on. My wife will ask me, what are you doing this day? Well, let's see what the Cardinals are doing. That'll tell me what I'm doing. What are the Red Sox doing? When's Red Sox opening day? When's the postseason start? Baseball is my end-all, be-all for months and months of the year. In hockey season, it's like, all right, well, this hockey's going on, but baseball is starting soon. I look forward to every year having some sort of day where I can go to a Cardinal game in the morning and a Blues playoff game at night. That might be happening coming up this week. Or I'm sorry, not this week, but May 2nd. There's talk that the hockey schedule could start May 2nd, and I have a rain-postponed game against the Royals that's going to take place on the 2nd. I think that's not necessarily going to be the first day of the playoffs just because they're making up a game on May 1st between a couple of teams. Not the Blues, but the schedules. They had to postpone something due to the big, bad snowstorm that came through a couple weeks ago, in April. So I don't think that's going to happen quite that way, but alas, you never know. But baseball's going on, and normally I'm completely gung-ho about it. This year, I'm having a little bit of trouble, and it stems from a lot of things. I know people are upset about the lockout stuff, but it got resolved. There's things I like, there's things I don't. We kind of talked about it in previous episodes. I don't like that they're adding more playoff teams. I think it makes it really easy for teams to say, well, we don't have to do anything because we should be able to get in as long as we're playing well. They're getting real close to the good teams will get in and the bad teams won't. I already talked about how asinine the NBA play-in rounds were because it didn't do anything. You took your 8 seed out and put your 9 seed in. That's all you did. I don't think the baseball teams that are going to play in the extra wild card spots deserve to go. And that's as a Cardinal fan, if the Cardinals don't make it, they need to get better. I don't want another seed there so that I can maybe go to a playoff game. I want them to be good enough to go to the World Series. I don't want my team to strive to get in as the last seed in their league. The elimination of the pitcher hitting and the DH in both leagues, I'm 50-50 on that, maybe 60-40. I wish the pitcher were still there. I've talked about it. I like that the pitchers hit in one league. It makes the two leagues different. I'm disappointed in the Cardinals for how they approached the DH, and you're going to have to follow me on this. I am excited to see Albert Pujols back in St. Louis. I think it's a great way for him to finish his career. I did give him a standing ovation on opening day when I went. I'm happy. I'm happy to see him and Yachty and Wainwright all maybe go out together. Having said that, they just signed Corey Dickerson, who I've used him in fantasy baseball. He's a good player. He's not a power hitter. He's more of a singles hitter in his career has had some speed, so he can get on, maybe steal a base, maybe make that to second base. But I just don't see this as a championship DH spot. Now, maybe Nolan Gorman comes up at some point. But I don't feel like they did all they could to make their lineup better. I'm not as upset about that as I sound. I just see teams go out and get like Kyle Schwarber in Philadelphia and Nick Castellanos. I see Nelson Cruz going to the Washington Nationals, who may or may not even be competitive. But the Cardinals went out and got Albert Pujols, and in my opinion, ticket sales grab. Opening day tickets went way up. All sorts of tickets got sold. I feel like they're selling tickets. And I'm going to feel like this all year. They didn't add any pitching. Jack Flaherty is already hurt. They did not go out and add anybody. Now, is it egregious that they didn't go and sign someone like bring J.A. Happ back? No. It's not the end of the world that they didn't bring J.A. Happ back. There are other pitchers they could have gone after. But if you look at their rotation coming into the season, it was going to be probably Wainwright, Flaherty, Miles Michaelis, who's coming off injury, and he's pitched pretty well so far. Dakota Hudson, coming off an injury, hasn't pitched that great so far. And they brought in Steven Matz, who I like. I did like that move. But that's not the most reliable rotation of all time in terms of health. And Flaherty's already hurt. And I'm going to write off some of the struggles by pitchers early just because they had a short spring training. Spring training is more for the pitchers than the hitters. The hitters can get their timing pretty quick. The pitchers need to get stretched out and get their work in so they don't get hurt. I'm waiting until May before I start writing off people in fantasy baseball. So that tells you the same. I feel the same way about real baseball. I'm not saying Dakota Hudson's going to be bad all year. I think he's going to be okay, but it's going to take some time. But guys are getting hurt. We already saw the Dodgers pull Kershaw in a perfect game, which was absolutely stupid. I get the whole thing with trying to keep him healthy for later in the year, but it's a perfect game. If the guy says he feels okay, you let him pitch. This isn't the Johan Santana situation. Kershaw had thrown 80 pitches. The odds are someone's going to get a hit off of him, and you can pull him anyway. Let's be honest. And I don't want to hear the devil's advocate of, well, then you can pull him anyway, and hope the rest of the team had taken care of it. Here's where some of my problem with the Cardinals starts. They fired Mike Schilt in the offseason, as I've probably already spoken about, for philosophical differences. Now, when you read between the lines, that's the analytics department. Teams are going to this whole analytics game scripting thing, and I absolutely can't stand it. Use your eyes, see what your pitchers are doing, use analytics as a tool. I think I've mentioned this. Derek Gould even talked about how owners and players are kind of recognizing that there's this rush to Moneyball and analytics where it's like the pillar of baseball as opposed to being a tool to complement what you already know. Do you need analytics to tell Arenado how to throw the ball, how to hit the ball? Do you need analytics to tell you how Jake DeGrom pitches? No. They're using it to script games. Go back to the World Series in 2020 when Blake Snell was cruising, got taken out in the 5th inning, and then the Rays kind of imploded. Their best pitcher at the time, forget Glasnow, he had pitched the day before, their best pitcher was out there, and then he wasn't. And then the rest of it fell apart. Now the Rays, ironically, seem to be going more towards their players they have. They're not as reliant on the analytics side of it. But that doesn't mean they're throwing it out. It's still how they function. It's how the Tampa Bay Rays function. The St. Louis Cardinals, who have been a league competitor, they are seen as a pennant contender every year. Even their years that they're bad, they get credit for being the St. Louis Cardinals. They have a system that works. They do things kind of the traditional way. They fired their manager, who's a traditionalist, supposedly over the use of analytics. Now, I've read rumblings where Mike Schilt was back and forth on some things. But they get rid of their manager to claim they're going to use more analytics. We don't even know how Oliver Marmol is going to be as a manager because we don't know if he's managing or the book is. I can't stand the idea of using the book to run your game. You know who your best pitchers are. Use it to tell what matchups are. I play fantasy baseball. I'm not benching Paul Goldschmidt or Nolan Arenado because they don't hit so-and-so well. Look at the Dodgers in 2018 against the Red Sox. They did all the matchup and analytics stuff, and they didn't play Bellinger or Muncy against Sale and Price, and lost games 1 and 2 pretty bad because they didn't play their best two hitters because they're left-handed. This whole having to platoon everyone thing. Now, the Giants, it seems like they got more out of their group than they should have last year by using all that stuff. They have one of the Dodgers' old front office guys, Farhan Zaidi. That's how they're running things now. Look at the Phillies. They tried this for a couple of years. Gabe Kapler was a disaster. We had guys getting taken out in like the third inning and then the bullpen imploding. You have to have the right pieces there. Joe Girardi is now the manager of the Phillies, who's very old school, and the Phillies kind of run things a little more traditionally. I'm not saying the analytics game scripting route is evil, but I don't think every team needs to be doing it. The Cardinals have this saying that's, well, the landscape of the league. And they feel like the landscape of the league is that everyone's doing this, and the reason that they're not catching up is because they're not using analytics. If they had used analytics, maybe they would have won the World Series last year. The Cardinals didn't win the division last year because when they lost their rotation, because people like me and my dad and Tim had to use the phrase, well, we'll see if either of our two starting pitchers is pitching today. Because Wainwright and Kim, who wasn't even in the rotation by the end of the year, what did they do at the end of the year last year? They went out and they got Lester and Happ, two traditional starting pitchers to try to bolster their rotation. The Cardinals, analytics wasn't what was going to save their season last year. It was adding players. We were excited last year because we added Nolan Arenado. The Cardinals, if you just put the pieces on the field, the analytics will help guide you, but if the Cardinals think they can analytics their way through the game without adding pieces, like we can just take any old guy and throw him out there and he'll perform. That's not how it works. There's a system to the analytics and the Moneyball thing. All you have to do is even watch the movie. Now, I knew about Moneyball before the movie came out, but they're talking about guys who got on base. They looked at the statistics. It's not we can take somebody off the trash heap and make him into a god. I know the Cardinals have done that before, but it's not realistic to think that you don't have to do anything in the offseason besides signing Steven Matz and bring back an old, broken-down Albert Pujols who only hits lefties, who, by the way, they're going to squeeze every ounce of juice out of him they can because they want to see him hit the 700th home run, probably at Busch Stadium. So I feel like the Cardinals are going this cheapo route. And, but ironically, the team's not much different from where it was at the beginning of last year when we were all excited because we had Arenado. Flaherty being gone really hurts. Now, here's the problem. Wainwright, Michaelis, Matz, Hudson is the first four of your rotation. Flaherty was supposed to be the other guy who'd be at the top, but, well, to replace Flaherty, you'd think maybe Jake Woodford, who's one of their young starting pitchers, who's on the roster in the bullpen. He was with them last year. He performed a lot of different roles for them. He was in the bullpen. He was in the rotation. He was fine at the end of the year in the rotation. You'd think just throw the guy in who you had at the end of last year. Instead, they've got Drew Verhagen, who used to be with Detroit, who was terrible in spring. They wanted him to win this fifth starter job, they came out and said, and he was terrible. Now, I'm never to put anyone down personally, but let's be honest, if you're building the rotation, you can't put a guy in who's not having any success. It's like, okay, well, maybe Woodford be in the rotation. They want Jordan Hicks to be in the rotation, and they've talked about using him as an opener. The Tampa Bay Rays are trying to abandon the opener. The opener doesn't work when you don't have a bullpen. The Cardinals have like one reliable reliever currently. It's Giovanni Gallegos. Then you talk about Genesis Cabrera, TJ McFarland, Nick Whitgren, Ryan Helsley. Those are good pieces, but we don't really know. They're not the guys who were setting up as much at the end of last year. Luis Garcia's gone, and I think he was kind of fluky. We'll see if McFarland continues what he's been doing, but it's not like you're running out there, what the White Sox tried to do with Hendricks and Kimbrel and Aaron Bummer and Tepera last year at the end of the year. And I know it didn't work because Kimbrel was more comfortable in the closer role, and now he's in L.A. as the Dodgers closer, and he's pitching great. So magically, all of a sudden, he's good again as a closer, where he was bad in setup at the end of last year, and he was an all-star at the beginning of last year. I digress. The Cardinals don't have that bullpen set up. They didn't go out and get anyone besides Nick Whitgren to add to the bullpen. They didn't add to the bullpen. They're going to use an opener who's a guy who used to be one of your closer options. You're going to take him out of the bullpen where you need relief help and into the rotation where you have a guy in Jake Woodford who could do that job and use him as an opener. Now, maybe they're going to stretch him out, but it's a guy who's never been healthy for more than, a month or two at a time. He never stays healthy. He throws 100 to like 104. He's come back from injury. Can he pitch 5 innings? Can he pitch 5 innings without throwing 100 the whole time? Because you can't throw 100 for 5, 6, 7 innings. And it's another thing. I'm tired of baseball going to, well, let's pitch guys for 3 innings. No, let's pitch guys for 7 innings, because if they're a starting pitcher and they're good, they're good. That means your bullpen's more rested, and when you need somebody, you have them, not just, well, we'll pitch Group A today and Group B tomorrow, and gee, I wish I had somebody from Group A because that's who I need, but I can't because I'm bullpenning every day. Bullpenning doesn't work outside of the playoffs, and your best strategy isn't bullpenning in the playoffs. If you told me that, look what they tried to do last year. Adam Wainwright pitched as deep as he possibly could in the wildcard game. We had Wainwright versus Scherzer. Do you think that bullpenning was on the mind of either of the managers? No, because you have 2 of the better starters from last year going head-to-head. You're not going to take them out. You're not going to take Max Scherzer out of a game to say, all right, you've pitched your 2 innings. Let's put Drew Verhagen in. No, you're going to let those guys pitch. And I think the Cardinals have a misplaced faith in this analytics concept and bullpenning and openers and stuff like that, where the league has gone through this cycle a little bit, and some of the teams are already coming out of it. And the Cardinals are late to this party. But more so, the Cardinals feel like, the Cardinals feel like the missing link between them and getting back to the World Series is not using their best players as much and not signing the best players or trading for the best players or calling up their best players. But let's see what the book says we should do and letting it control the entire outcome of the game. That's completely misplaced. You let the book script everything. You let the book tell you so-and-so doesn't hit so-and-so very well. Paul DeJong doesn't hit pitchers of this type very well. Edmundo Sosa does. Okay, let's play Edmundo Sosa. I don't think the Cardinals are going about this right at all. And then the last bit of information dropped on me a few days ago that really set me off. This isn't even anything baseball related. We've been hearing rumblings for the past year and a half or so about supply chain issues and how we can't get stuff as quickly as we used to. And stuff stuck in the California harbors, bays and stuff like that because ships aren't ecologically friendly or something, and you get Newsom, the governor of California, doesn't want certain ships in or whatever, so they're not letting people in, or truckers aren't going into the state with certain trucks, and they're not taking as much stuff out because they have to switch trucks because their trucks have to be certain level of green or whatever nonsense you want to talk about with California. And I'm not trying to get political, but this is a reality. There are rules in California that there aren't in any other state that are being imposed, and so supplies are not coming from California, from the West Coast, as quickly as they could be. That's the reality. It's just like players who are unvaccinated can't play in Canada right now. Canadian teams have some level of advantage in that regard because they can have their whole team if everyone's vaccinated. So, I'm, like I said, not trying to get political, it's just a reality. So we have supply issues in certain places that in some cases are probably real because we had a year off of working, and in some cases are being created by not allowing things to function in certain ways. Well, I heard on Bally Sports Midwest from Dan McLaughlin, who's a pretty good source, that the Cardinals claim they're not wearing their Saturday cream home jerseys or blue road alternate jerseys on Saturdays until at least May because of supply cost issues. But guess what? Those jerseys are hanging in the shop for me to buy. So you're telling me, and this jersey won like best jersey in sports at one point, the cream home one. That's the one that says, it's the ones that say St. Louis with the red piping around it. One's blue, one's an off-white cream color. They wear the blue victory blues on the road. They wear the cream one at home. So you're telling me that there's so much supply issue that you're not going to wear any alternate jersey until further notice, which, by the way, I go to see Saturday games sometimes because I want to see that jersey. I'm a jersey fanatic. I love that jersey. It's my favorite one that I own. But you can buy enough of them to get them into the shop and charge almost $400 for them. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. You can't wear your own uniforms, but you can make me pay for them. I guess you can't, you're not making me do anything, but I find it outrageous. You're going to do all that. You're not going to sign that many players in the offseason. You're not going to try to keep up with the rest of the league. You're going to try to back your way into the last wild card spot. Because there's more wild card teams now. You're going to bank on the fact that Milwaukee maybe got worse, even though their pitching is better than yours, but that the Cubs, the Reds, and the Pirates aren't going to be that good. And you're going to hope to battle it out with Milwaukee and then finish as maybe a wild card team, but then tell me you can't wear your own uniforms, but you can sell them to me in not only that shop, but the authentic shop too, where it's from the locker room from the year before. But you can't get yours. That doesn't sit well with me. And I've called ticket reps and told them, like, this is ridiculous. You can't wear your own jerseys. Now, I haven't seen that many alternate jerseys around the league so far. I did see Minnesota wearing their blue. I've seen the City Connect. Boston wore their horrid yellow jerseys, representing the Boston Marathon all weekend, before wearing their regular home white jerseys that say Boston across the front for Patriots Day. So they've worn two different ones, but I haven't seen the red or the blue. I haven't seen that many. I don't know if I've seen the White Sox wear black or not, and they wear those. So maybe there's a little bit of jersey hang-up, but if the Cardinals just aren't wearing their jerseys to save a little cash, that's ridiculous. And this is why I'm not as excited as I was a year ago at this point. Last year, I tuned into every Cardinal game. This year, the Cardinals are on tonight, and I'm rolling my eyes. Anybody who knows me knows that I love the Cardinals. There are days where my wife would accuse me of loving them more than her. That's not the case at all. But it's definitely a major part of my life, like a religion to somebody else. This is what I live for. And I'm not excited about Cardinals baseball right now. I'm glad it's here. Trust me, I'm appreciative. I'm not ungrateful. I'm just not as excited as I normally am. And I'm still going to some games. But, I'm not planning every single trip. I'm waiting until the deals come out instead of pre-buying tickets. But they're not wearing their jerseys, which is that's the cherry on top. Like, if everything else was going fine, and they said, we're not wearing the jerseys for the first month of the year, it'd be like, okay, this is stupid. But I feel like Pujols is a ticket money grab. And they didn't do anything with the rotation besides Mats. They won't put the guy who should be in the rotation, who's a starting pitcher in it, they're putting a reliever in it. They have a starting pitching spot open, and they're putting a reliever in it and a starting pitcher in the bullpen. It reminds me of a Jim Gaffigan sketch where he talks about how Christmas is like a drunk person's holiday. Let's take these lights and put them in our yard, and let's take this tree and put it in our living room. Let's take this reliever and put him in our rotation, and let's put this starting pitcher in our bullpen. Is the starting pitcher going to pitch into high leverage situations? No. What's he going to do? When the relief pitcher's tired, the starting pitcher is going to pitch for a few innings. Oh, well, why don't you just flip that and then use the reliever in high leverage situations? Well, that's what I'm saying. It's idiotic. So that's the Cardinals. They're not evil. I just think they're being stupid right now. Having said that, there have been rumblings of the team being sold. No one has confirmed any of this. Mike Shannon said something about it, and no one's denied it is the problem. That was last year, and everyone thought, they're not going to sell the team. But then they do all this nonsense. So, Lord knows. Let's go out to the East Coast and talk about my Red Sox. We're going to pass by the Cleveland Guardians, who could have done anything with their name besides what they did. The Red Sox had a lot of credibility for me coming into this season because they went 6 games in the ALCS when they had no business going that far with the roster they had. It's a good roster. It wasn't a great roster. They were the best team in baseball for a while. And then fell, normalized. But they ended up making the playoffs. They snuck in as the top wild card on the last day of the season. They beat the Yankees in the wild card game. They beat the division-winning Tampa Bay Rays in the division series in 4 games. And then ended up winning for 2 of the first 3 games of the ALCS against the Houston Astros. They lost game 1, but beat the trash out of... No pun intended. They beat the tar out of the Astros in games 2 and 3, and everyone thought, okay, game 4, here we go. And they could not win another game. The Astros kind of turned it around, and the Red Sox were 2 wins from a World Series, and it really felt like they were trending that way. Kike Hernandez was the hottest player on the planet. Devers was banged up, but still playing well. But it kind of fell apart. But it was like, okay, well, here's a round of applause for your efforts. And then they went and signed Trevor Story. Now, Eduardo Rodriguez left to the Tigers, and I don't really blame them for not wanting to sign him long-term. But, with the money that he was going to get, he's a good pitcher. He's not a great pitcher. But they didn't really replace him. They have the similar problem to the Cardinals. First of all, their bullpen's a bigger mess than the Cardinals. They have Garrett Whitlock, who they need to pitch in every role. They have Matt Barnes, who they want to have as the closer. He was an all-star last year, but fell apart due to overuse in the first half and had back spasms to start the year this year. So we'll see if he's kind of started slow. The idea is that he would slide into the closer role. They did add Jake Diekman and Matt Strahm as lefties. But besides that, they brought Hansel Robles back. They just don't quite have any reliable options. They have Whitlock, who they have to pitch everywhere. In the rotation, it was going to go into the season as Sale, Eovaldi, Pivetta, who had a really good year last year, and then some sort of combination of Tanner Houck, their young pitcher. They brought Rich Hill back again, who's older but still seems fairly valuable, and Michael Wacha, who has not regained any of the form he had with the Cardinals since going to the Mets in 2020 in the COVID season, and last year with Tampa Bay, where he ended up getting moved to the bullpen. Sale got hurt throwing to start the year, and we all knew there would be injuries coming out of the lockout and the shortened spring training. Sale is apparently made of glass at this point. He has some sort of minor rib fracture, and so it was just throwing. He didn't feel right. He'll be back at some point, supposedly. He didn't blow his arm out, but that has to get strong enough where it's not going to do it again. So Eovaldi's your opening day starter, followed by Nick Pivetta. Now, most of last year, there was Eduardo Rodriguez between those two. You say, okay, Pavetta's the third, Erod's the second, and then you just kind of fill in the gaps from there. They had Martin Perez and Garrett Richards, who, for all intents and purposes, aren't any better than the last two guys they put in this year, and Houck took Garrett Richards' spot. So you've got Eovaldi, Pivetta, and Houck, who's a young guy, who you're giving him his chance. For better or for worse, Houck's in the rotation, you're giving him his chance. Wacha and Hill. I don't really have a lot of faith in Wacha and Hill being there all year. Oddly enough, Wacha's pitching really well. Hill is not, but Hill was pretty good last year at times. He was a trade deadline target for Tampa. Or, no, the Mets. He was for the Mets. He's pitched for Tampa. He's pitched for everyone at this point, it feels like. This is like his third or fourth stint in Boston. He's pitched there as a reliever and as a starter. But they need another starting pitcher. They can't go through this year. And I mean, in addition to when Chris Sale comes back, I think you need Sale, Eovaldi, Pivetta, Houck, and someone else. Now, there was talk that it could be Whitlock. And that might be the case at some point. But they don't have the bullpen pieces right now either. Now, this isn't what's got me upset about them. I expected this. I expected there to be a little bit of frustration with the pitching in comparison to, Toronto and the Yankees. I knew this is how they were going to start the year, and it's just starting the year. It's not saying they're not going to go do something. For all we know, they'll go out and get a J.A. Happ or somebody else like that. And I don't know how he's any better than the last two guys they have, but point being, they can still do some things. Here's the stories that have me frustrated with the Red Sox. So you signed Trevor Story, and I liked the move. And Xander Bogaerts was part of that process. And Trevor Story moves to second base. Xander Bogaerts has said he would like to opt out at the end of this year, but he would like to stay. Jacob deGrom of the Mets has said this too. He'd like to be done with his contract, but he wants to renegotiate. But as for Bogaerts, he wants to stay. Now, I think a lot of people in Boston appreciate him, but I don't think around the league we really appreciate the level of player he is. Look at the players who have been ahead of him. During the World Series runs, we talked about the Betts, Benintendi outfield. We talked about J.D. Martinez. Xander Bogaerts has been there for the 13 World Series and the 18 World Series, and he's still here. He's been a staple for this team. He's not the best defensive shortstop, but he catches what's hit to him, and he makes the plays. He's not dynamic, but he knows what he can and can't do, and he wants to stay at shortstop, so they left him there. You bring in Trevor Story while a guy says he wants to rework his contract. You're adding competition to your own team for that contract. He can say, you signed Story for this much. I've been a better player. I would like this much. Now, to Bogaerts' credit, he's a great teammate, and he's been part of the process of bringing Story in. He called him. He didn't just text him, and Story said that was part of what he was excited about. Xander Bogaerts called him. He told him, I want you here. Forget about my situation. I want to win. I want you here. So all sorts of credit to him. He's become one of my favorite players. My favorite players with the Red Sox rotate a little more than the Cardinals because the Cardinals seem to keep guys, and the Red Sox keep having this issue. We'll expand on that in a moment. The other player in question is Rafael Devers, who still has some team control. Rafael Devers, they would like to get a deal done with him as well. They have not been able to do that. It says that they are worlds apart, according to some of the reports. I don't really know what that means. It could mean anything from years to money. I don't know. But they need to get him wrapped up because this is the middle of your order. You got rid of Mookie Betts. You got rid of Benintendi more because he was downward trending. Betts because he was going to be a free agent and wanted to test free agency. Currently, I'm looking at this, Rafael Devers is signed. He's signed through this year and is a free agent in 2024. So he has the 22 season, the 23 season, and then he's a free agent. So they need to get something done. These two guys are the middle of your order. They're the faces of your franchise. They're still fairly young. You've moved on from Mookie Betts, and for all the scrutiny that you should have gotten for that, And in some ways you did. You traded like one of the best players in your franchise's history. Again, Babe Ruth. And you kind of got away with it. Well, here we are again. Here's Xander Bogaerts, and here's Rafael Devers. Now, reports are coming out. I don't have any numbers for the Devers situation. The Devers situation is a little bit different because there is a little bit of team control. So you can still do it for a couple of years. I don't think these guys really want to negotiate during the season as part of it, but you still have some control over Devers. The talk was that they were just far apart. Bogaerts, it sounded like things just kind of stalled. Bogaerts has an opt-out this year. He has like 6 more years. They offered him another year and about like $20 million. Story, I think it's like 6 years, $100 million or so. Trevor Story his contract's like 4 years, 120 or something like that. I don't know the Baez contract, Javi Baez. Obviously, the Mets gave Lindor like a 10-year type deal. If you're Bogaerts and you're going, well, you're going to offer me 1 more year at that price. I'm not. So you're going to have me make like the money Story makes over 4 years, but for me, it's going to be like 6, 7 years. I'd be annoyed too. Now, let's not say he's annoyed. He's a great teammate. He's a great personality. He's a great individual. But you're not making it easy for him to stay. You're not. And the Red Sox have a history of this lowballing stuff. Now, maybe this is wrong. This comes from John Heyman, who has a lot of inside, but I don't always like his takes. Sometimes there are things that he says that I disagree with or turn out not to be quite 100% the way it could be. There's other writers I trust more. But anyway, John Lester, when he was going to be a free agent in the after the 2014 season, the Red Sox offered him something in spring training. I don't remember the numbers on it, but it was very, very low. It was not the market value. And he said, no, I'm going to wait till free agency. Thank you very much. And as he recounts it, he fully intended to come back to Boston. And they said, can we trade you to Oakland to get a piece? That would end up being Yoenis Cespedes, who ended up being traded after the season for Rick Porcello, who ends up winning a Cy Young in 16 and the World Series in 18 with the Red Sox. But Lester gets traded. He says, yeah. And he said, after Oakland, he realized, man, the grass isn't always greener on the first side of the fence. A lot of people feel like it's not always greener on the other side, but in Lester's case, it didn't feel like the end of the world to go to a new team, because he did, and he went to the playoffs with them. He signs with the Cubs. Everyone in Red Sox Nation is devastated. They thought he was coming back. And he said later, if they hadn't traded me, I probably would have. I didn't really want to leave. But when they made me leave via trade, the lowball offer thing didn't help either. I felt like I could get what I was looking for somewhere else, and I was comfortable with trying. Xander Bogaerts has not seen the other side of the fence yet. He can if the Red Sox screw this up. Now, I don't think they're going to trade him, but let's be honest. The Dodgers just let Corey Seager walk. That was the other shortstop contract, and that was a huge contract. The Dodgers let Corey Seager walk, and they took they took Trey Turner from the Nationals last year, and they moved him over to second base. But now he's back at shortstop. Well, I could see a scenario where Xander Bogaerts ends up on the Dodgers for Gavin Lux, who's their young second baseman, who also plays shortstop. You put Lux at second base, and Trevor Story goes to shortstop. I'm not saying this is going to happen. This is just a possibility. I could totally see this happening. The Dodgers are not afraid of spending. They're not afraid of going over the luxury tax, the soft salary cap. They're not afraid of that. So I can totally see a scenario where the Dodgers end up with a Xander Bogaerts, who's one of the best players all around, who plays shortstop in the league. And once you leave Boston, there's no guarantees he's staying at short. So you might be able to see his defense at second base and see if he's any better there. So I'm just frustrated. I'm frustrated that the Red Sox and the Bogaerts thing. Now, I feel like the Bogaerts-Devers situation will resolve itself. I think there's some time. I think Bogaerts wants to stay, and like I said, Devers has a couple years left. I think they kind of want to see what happens with Bogaerts before they get to Devers. If Bogaerts leaves, maybe they'll put all their efforts into Devers. If Bogaerts stays, then they'll start working with Devers, but maybe they'd be a little more careful. I don't know. It's hard to say. This ownership is interesting because they are They got rid of Dave Dombrowski, whose thing is signing and trading and adding and adding and adding and breaking down farm systems to win a World Series, and he succeeded. They bring in Chaim Bloom from Tampa to try and build it back, but also stay competitive. Goes out and signs Trevor Story. So it's hard to say what's going to happen in terms of spending. So that's why I'm a little bit down on the start of baseball season. I shouldn't be. I should be excited. It's going to be my favorite time of year, and I think the weather's got me down too. It hasn't quite warmed up yet. It will. I'll go to games. We'll have the hockey. The cure-all is winning. Absolutely. The cure-all for everything in sports is winning. For all this nonsense I'm talking about with the Cardinals, if they can compete for the division and go to the playoffs as a division winner or one of the top seeds, I'm not going to care what they did in April or how they cash grabbed Albert Pujols for tickets. Right now, they're in first place in the division, like a week and a half in, almost 2 weeks in. They're at 5-3. Cubs are 6-4. Milwaukee's 6-5. Pittsburgh's 5-5. And then Cincinnati's 2-9. So the Cardinals aren't playing bad. They're above 500. They're 5-3. They're straight. They lost their last game, but they've won before that. So we'll see what happens. In the American League East, the Red Sox are in second place at 5-5, tied with the Yankees. Toronto's at 6-4. So the Red Sox are competing. So generally, winning is the cure-all. I think you can kind of understand my frustration. I don't like that I don't feel like I'm excited. It's kind of like I used to feel about the Blues before they won, before Armstrong really started building it up. It was like if I was disappointed in how the Blues kind of conducted their offseason, they did well. Like before the 16 season where they went to the conference finals, they traded Oshie for Brouwer, and I was really mad about it and didn't really want to go see a game, and then they ended up going to the conference finals. The next season, the 16-17 season, they went to the second round. Then the 17-18 season, they looked like I was really excited because they went out and got like a Braden Shen, and they were going to be really good. After the previous year, they fell in the second round of the playoffs, but they added some pieces, and then they missed the playoffs and completely collapsed. And then the 19 season, we were really excited about, and they were terrible in the first half, and then they ended up winning the Stanley Cup. Well, maybe this is how things work. Maybe I'm not all excited about either of these teams yet, but maybe they get on their horse. There's still some things to be done, and I know the offseason with the lockout had some to do with it for a lot of teams. It doesn't feel like either of these teams are complete at this point. I'm anxious that they're not going to complete the teams. That we're just going to go in with what we got and try to get in as one of those wild card teams that they expanded to. That's not the way to do it. And that's definitely not the Cardinal way. And it's not the way the Red Sox compete with the Yankees or Toronto in the way of this year. But that's about where we're at. It's mid to late April. We're getting ready for the hockey playoffs. Basketball's started. Baseball's underway. We'll see how things go. Maybe we'll check in here in a few weeks during the hockey playoffs and see how that's going on. We'll see what's going on with baseball. Mid-May, we'll get into Armed Forces and Memorial Day. I've heard from a lot of writers that Memorial Day is kind of the first benchmark. You know what you've got when you're right around Memorial Day. And if you're doing bad, you might want to change it. If you're doing good, you might want to add to it. But for now, thanks for listening. This has been another episode of StraussNet Sports Radio. We'll put this up on YouTube. Check in. Let us know how your teams are doing. See what you think about the Stanley Cup playoffs coming up. Has anybody ever been to a Stanley Cup playoff game? If you haven't, it's like nothing you've ever been to. I've never been to an NBA playoff game, and I've never been to an NFL game at all, so I have nothing to compare it to in that regard. But it's just something else that time of year. So thanks for listening. This has been another episode of StraussNet Sports Radio. On the front line,